he had so much respect on the streets. But the only difference I had was I feel like the way for me to do my job would be to gain that respect by respecting other people, not by knocking somebody's head around. I don't think I ever had one real fight the entire time I was in, 27 years I was in law enforcement. I had a lot of wrestling matches with people trying to get away, but not one real fight. And it's just one of those things where my pride, it made me realize that if you're gonna do this job, you got to do the very best you can do. And it's all about helping people.
Let 'em breathe, Will.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Lawmen's Lens. I'm your host, Danny Jones, and with me here this afternoon are three of my esteemed former colleagues and law enforcement officers who I've worked many years in the field of law enforcement with. There are more than 100 years of law enforcement experience between all of us, probably more like 150. We're all kind of getting up there in age. With me this afternoon is Mr. Wiley Battle.
Wiley Battle.
Retired sergeant from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. Mr. Albert Dowdell, former chief of police for the city of Belgrade, better known as Secret Squirrel, from his early days in the 80s in the city of Belgrade. And Mr. Leonard Mitchell, better known as Bernard to a lot of his friends. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon and taking time to talk about some of these topics that come across the TV and our radio and in our communities throughout every day. So to get us started, why don't we just give a little background of each of you to kind of talk about how you started, where you've been, and where you are now. We'll start with you, Albert.
Well, my first exposure to law enforcement was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps, and they needed some military policemen, so I got temporarily assigned to a military police unit. And the thing that intrigued me more than anything was the freedom, the ability to do so much. Because the military, you know, they always say that you are government property. And pretty much law enforcement officers, we could do almost anything. And it was a tremendous experience for me. I really didn't learn much about law because my job mainly was watching the front gate and doing minor patrolling. But after I got out of the military, I had a few jobs here and there. And the last job I had, I was selling burglar alarms. I can recall they had assigned me the area in Lake Worth. Now imagine this, black man knock on your door. And he tell you he's selling burglar alarms. I sold about 0 burglars. Matter of fact, I think I only got into one house. Nobody would let me in. So my wife was working, and as things go, baby, you got to get a job. You got to do something. And I had offers to work in the local police department, but this thing was on my mind, like, okay, I got friends. If I become a police officer, I ain't gonna have no friends. But when I really sat down and thought about it, what was more important? When I looked at my refrigerator and my cupboards, and there wasn't much there that I needed, that I wanted to eat, it trumped my friends. I said, you know what, I'm gonna do this. Now, I'm not telling you that I had all the courage in the world. I was scared as hell, but I had to do something for my family. So in 1980, a friend of mine recommended me to the police department. I didn't even have an interview. I went in, the assistant chief of police, he talked to me about 5 minutes. He said, you've been recommended by Iceman, that's all I need to know. Take this, fill this out, we'll see you tomorrow.
Who was Iceman?
Leroy Carrigan.
Leroy Carrigan.
And that's the way it was. I mean, on his word, they hired me. And because I had so much faith and trust in him, I said, you know what, I'm gonna do the best job I can.
And Leroy Carrigan was a police officer?
Leroy Carrigan was a sergeant in the police department. He was the only black sergeant in the police department. And they had a large amount of respect for him because he had the community that was the most trouble under control. I mean, when Leroy carried a big stick, and I mean a big stick during that time, and if you got out of line, you got knocked back in line. You know, that was his way. And I always wanted to imitate him because he had so much respect on the streets. But the only difference I had was I feel like the way for me to do my job would be to gain that respect by respecting other people, not by knocking somebody's head around. I don't think I ever had one real fight the entire time I was in, 27 years I was in law enforcement. I had a lot of wrestling matches with people trying to get away, but not one real fight. And it's just one of those things where my pride, it made me realize that if you're gonna do this job, you got to do the very best you can do. And it's all about helping people. And it was a challenge. It was a challenge. I remember one of the first days on patrol, I'm riding down B Place, and I'm riding like this. I wouldn't look to the left, I wouldn't look to the right. I was so scared. I said, you know what, how in the heck you gonna do this job when you got fear? So when I got off that night, I went home and I sat on my porch. And I said, you know what, you got to make up your mind. If you're going to do this job, do it. If you ain't, call them tomorrow, tell them you're not coming. I said, that's it. I said, that's when the secret squirrel was born.
All right, put a pin in it. Hold us right there. We're going to go over to Leonard. Leonard, tell us about your experience and how you got into law enforcement.
Well, actually, when I was in college at Florida A&M University, I was in ROTC and got my Army commission as a second lieutenant. And I had the privilege of meeting some guys in Tallahassee before I actually got into police work. I met Captain Floyd Reeves, who then Mel Tucker brought to Tallahassee from Atlanta, who was a sergeant. At that time, you got to remember that Tallahassee was transitioning as a community. It had come out of race riots and those kinds of things. They wanted a federal consent decree, and brought Floyd in. Walt McNeil, who later became sheriff from Southern Miss. And so as a young ROTC cadet and moving on, becoming commissioned and coming back, and when I got to meet these guys and their experiences, it gave me a different insight into police work. Having grown up in Delray, I mean, I knew Lorenzo Brooks and Mr. Butler and those guys and Matthew Mitchell and some others who were unique in their own way. But then I had the privilege of meeting the late Boone Darden when he was running for sheriff of Palm Beach County. And just listening to him talk about what it meant to serve a community was a big deal. And then, of course, going to the academy, getting my certification, and then getting into police work, and then coming back working for the school district, and that the impact that you get to have on young men and women really becomes your mantra, because you really get to see what service means. And it's hard to walk away from it, especially when you see what comes out of the good you do. And that to me was the biggest thing. And it was always about how much more can I do? Because I knew that the more I was able to do and reach somebody's child, the better off their life would be. So that became the driving force for me.
All right, Sergeant Battle.
Okay, I started my law enforcement career. I'm also an alumni from Florida A&M University. Upon my graduation, I became a state parole and probation officer. In 1979, 1981, I started, was hired by the sheriff's office, and I worked for the sheriff's office for 30 years. During that time, I was road patrol, detective, sergeant, organized crime unit for probably more than 7 or 8 years, 9 years, somewhere in there. And among other things, I've traveled out throughout Florida working undercover. Got a chance to go to North Carolina, Georgia, and places like that. And that was basically it for me. I loved it. I loved it.
Well, I started in police work in 1983 probably by accident. You know, my best friend wanted to be a police officer so bad growing up when we were graduating high school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Actually, I told him I was going to be a criminal. He had to catch me. Jeffrey Godfrey. And I got an opportunity to go to the police academy, but I had to sponsor myself. And, you know, back then, I didn't really have a lot of money. And I went to my mom and said, hey, you know, I'm thinking about not going to college. I want to go to be a police officer. It's kind of the same. And I've been working as a young kid at the Holiday Inn in Belglade when it was open. And I would give my mom money from time to time. And I wanted to go to the police academy. And I asked her to pay. And she just went in the room and got her bank book and said, okay, here's all your money back that I've been saving for you. So that's how I kind of sponsored myself through the police academy. Started in South Bay, was successful as a police officer. I enjoyed it, and I kind of worked my way through the ranks through the years at a couple departments, and ultimately became the chief of police in my hometown in South Bay. I left there and went to the city of Riviera Beach as the assistant chief. Retired in 2013 and became the deputy city manager. And kind of when I left government work, and I had what I think is a full career, and I really enjoyed helping people and being in law enforcement. You know, I told you to put a pin in something a minute ago, Albert, and we're not going to take that pin out yet. We're going to come back to that. I'd just like to ask you guys a question. You know, we all got in police work in the 80s, some of us in the early 80s, some of us in the late 80s. What do you think is the major difference today in police work than when we entered police work in the 80s? If a new officer's entering today, and here it is, 2024, what do you think they're experiencing compared to what we experienced?
As we were talking earlier, I think their sense of community is different than ours. They don't buy into the community as we did. You know, personally, when something happened in my community, I took it personal. I mean, you commit a crime, you hurt a senior citizen, or you just do something that's illegal. You're on the list. I'm coming at you. You know, and I don't think these officers have that kind of motivation right now. Not to say that they're bad officers. They just don't buy into it like we did during the time when I came into law enforcement.
I think that every agency should be a reflection of the community that it serves. It's no way you can have, for example, the Glades is predominantly black. How could you have a city of 17,000 people and maybe 5 black officers there out of 30 total officers? And I don't know the numbers, but what I'm saying, and I know over the years it's increased with minority hirings, but it's still not enough. And if you just open your eyes, you can see it. And then to that, and the way it was years ago when I started, I wasn't forced to live in Belglade. I chose to live in Belglade, chose to work in Belglade. A lot of people was put there because of punishment. So they had no reason to go beyond and over what they were supposed to do. You know, they had no connection to the community. And to this day, a lot of them still don't have any connection to the community.
You're saying there's not a vested interest?
No connection or vested interest.
Okay. Leonard?
For me, I guess the biggest thing was the lack of connectivity to the community you serve. If you see it as 12 hours and you go home, okay, what have you learned? Who do you care about? Where's your passion? But really, where's your commitment to having a sense of change for the community? And somebody says, well, everybody, we do our 12 hours and we go home. I say, well, do you know Miss Jones on this block? Do you know that she gets up early every morning because she likes to walk, right? Okay, what does that mean? Sometimes she leaves her door unlocked. But guess what? She's the lady that you want to be sure when traffic picks up, you might want to be at a location and ensure that everybody gives her that chance to cross the street. And then, of course, probably the biggest thing is there are a group of children every morning that go to a bus stop. Well, I know there's a group of guys that hang out on this corner. And guess what? You know they mean them kids no good in the morning. You need to be sure they see you, that you're going to be there when them children come by there. And what does that mean? The folk who live in that neighborhood see you doing that, and guess what you are now creating? You're creating a group of people, you know what? This cat all right. But bigger than that, you are protecting what? Their children. So what does that mean they're going to do for you? Anything that goes wrong in the neighborhood, they're going to come let you know. Now, they ain't going to tell you how they're going to let you know. But you be sitting out there one night, officer, you thirsty? Yeah, all right. Somebody be over in a minute. Now, he might be bringing you a cup, but you know there was a burglary a couple of days ago. Well, under the bottom of the cup, or he might drop a note in your car. Well, the burglar lived, the suspect, his house around the corner. We saw him go in. These people will find a way to communicate with you that nobody will know they're talking to you. And guess what that gives you? That gives you a sense of connection to the community. And then when you become really engaged is when they begin to bring to you the things that you need to help your job you become now a piece of the neighborhood. Don't y'all bother him.
Yes.
Did you find it difficult to cultivate or get information? I know there's a culture out there saying snitches end up with stitches.
Something like
Stitches
that.
get stitches.
Oh, I don't know what it is.
Snitches get stitches.
Can I tell you something, man? That's all hogwash. When you squeeze something
Hard enough.
and it hurts, something have a tendency to yell out. So when you grab it and squeeze it, people tend to want to talk. And it's not, and I'm not saying you hurt people or nothing like that, but people commit crime every day. So it's not hard to find people to tell you things. It's the way you ask and where you ask.
And how you ask.
Most people, police officers, they don't understand the community. When they go to a scene, things that happen, they walk up to people amongst everybody. You saw what happened, you know who did it. People have to live in the community. Who's gonna tell you, oh yeah, he did it. When you get in your car and leave, that person still have to live there in that community. So it's just the way you ask people and how you ask them.
I think more
People will communicate and help you and work with you.
It will.
More importantly is you have to be approachable. A lot of times these officers run around here with this mask on their face. It's like, don't say nothing to me, don't bother me. You know, I'm just here to put in 8, 12, whatever hours I got to do and go home. Leave me alone.
Don't touch my car.
But if you make them feel like they can approach you and talk to you and you treat them like somebody. I mean, I can remember going to scenes. I'm standing there, right? Guy walked by, screw it. He got on a yellow shirt over there. That's who did it. Walk off. Because they knew that once they gave me that information, I wasn't going to go to this guy and say, listen, so-and-so told me. I'm going to him and I'm going to pressure him and make him tell on himself.
You know, that's an interesting point, because when I went to Riviera Beach and I came from the school district. From school district to urban policing, okay? I'm in the middle of everybody, well, you're in Riviera Beach, you can't stop. One thing about people, I don't care where they're from. There's no such thing as a Riviera Beach man or a West Palm Beach man. It's just a man. Yeah. And it's just a family that wants to be treated like somebody. Well, when you hurt, people want to know that you have empathy for their situations. And if you come off like that, how do you come off like that? Well, I done been in St. James and Hilltop. I done been to more church services than stood in pulpits, and as Danny Jones would say.
And preach a little bit on the side too.
You got to
preach a little bit on the side.
You got a bootleg license to preach, but at the end of the day, they know I'm there.
Yeah.
But guess what? To show you the statistical dynamics of how that process works, the national homicide clearance rate was about 62%. When I was in special operations in the city of Riviera Beach, we were at 89.62. That's almost a 90% homicide clearance rate. Now, I never went to a homicide school, but the officers and the staff that was in that, they knew where I was we on this team together, and we got people to talk to us. I didn't put a bridle on them and how they go out and do their jobs. What I said was, let me take the marrows. I'm gonna go out here and we gonna press some flesh. Y'all gonna get these answers. And people begin to believe that you care. When they see you care, guess what they gonna do? When they see you in their community, oh, he was at church on Sunday. Yeah, I was, and I was the guest speaker. And I talked about whose team are you on? You with David or you gonna be with Goliath? And I'm gonna tell you why we gonna beat Goliath. So I know you're gonna join my team, because it's biblical. But and I said that to say you have to find a way to find out what makes them want to help you. And you have to give them that. But then guess what you also have to give them? That sense of caring. And if they find out that you don't care, guess what? You lose them. And once you've lost them,
That's it.
they ain't coming back. So you have to maintain that. And it takes a lot, physically and emotionally, because you have to have a vested interest in their feelings.
I'm lucky I had great guys that come before me, like Albert and Wyatt, especially when it came to building rapport in the community. I remember as a young officer, we were working Vice.
Yeah.
I was with Wiley, and we saw the guy that sold tobacco. He had Red Man chewing tobacco, and he was giving away free samples. And Wiley went over, and we got 10 or 12 samples. I said, man, what are you doing with the chewing tobacco, man? You don't chew tobacco. But there's a lot of old people in the community that chew tobacco. And we handed that Red Man chewing tobacco to those people in the community, building a relationship and a rapport with the community. Coaching Little League baseball in Pahokee. I may have met 20 young men who are going to grow up in that community one day. And people have a different respect sometimes when they see you outside of being a police officer, because I was called coach when I was on the baseball field. They're going to grow up. They're going to be a part of the community. And they know me as coach who's just happened to be wearing a police uniform to build that rapport and create some type of open communications with them. I think that makes a difference. Yeah. Have a vested interest in the community. We've all been in law enforcement for more than 30 years, and there have been many cases that we've been involved in, and some affected us differently than others. Let's talk about a case that has affected you as a law enforcement officer, good, bad, or indifferent, and why it affected you the way it did. Anyone?
This is not a case. It was an interaction. I did a lot of speaking to young people. Parents were bringing to me all the time to try and change their behavior. This one particular young lady, she was off the chain. Her daddy did everything he could to try to turn her away from some of the things that she was doing. I mean, she was really headed down a bad road. And he brought her to me. Now, I'm not going to be able to tell you what I said to her, but we had a conversation, and I explained to her in not so many terms that, if you continue the way you're going, there's not going to be much of a life for you. You need to make some changes in your life. You need to do something different. You need to really get into your studies and get up out of here. And this young lady, I guess she took it to heart. Sometime after that, the daddy came back to me and told me that there was a remarkable difference in her life, that she changed completely. That she started doing her work, she started studying, she was very mindful and respectful of the family. And she eventually went on to law school, graduated, and she's in corporate law right now. And every time I see the dad, he thanked me for interacting with his daughter and helping her to realize that the path she was traveling was not a good path. And that does me all the good in the world when somebody comes back to me and lets me know that I made a difference in somebody's life. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Helping somebody to overcome the difficulty they're facing, giving them those strategies that'll help them move forward.
Well, with me, you want to go back?
Go ahead, Wilder.
Well, with me, I can't say a particular case that intrigued me most, but the types of cases that held my interest most was
working with illegal lottery. As I worked a lot of cases, domestics and things of that nature, but the lottery cases was a lot of cluck and dagger and cat and mouse. You trying to see who's doing this, who's doing that, how to catch them. Cubans out of Miami was involved. Local people throughout the Glades was involved. They go here, go there. When a good night, you catch them, you get $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and try to put them out of business, because a lot of people thought that the illegal lottery trade was harmless. But what it did, it actually, the people who was in charge of the illegal lottery out of Miami and other places also financed illegal drugs and other illegal and illicit activities. So it wasn't all as good as people think it was. And it took money out of our communities and went to other people's communities. Never benefited our communities. So that's what I like to work.
I remember one Saturday evening, you and I were up in Belgrade on 5th and B Place, and we actually apprehended the guy with Bolita in illegal lottery, and they were hidden in some rabbits, some cottontails. Do you remember that?
Yep.
I'll put a picture up there and show you, but yeah, they were hidden in the cottontail rabbits. The guy said, "We don't have anything. All we have is a few rabbits we're taking up to sell." Okay, let us take a look at the rabbits. And we were able to get thousands of dollars from those rabbits. Leonard?
When we talk about certain cases and individual things you got involved in, my experiences go from extreme highs to extreme lows, and I'll give you one of the extreme highs. When I was working in the school district, I had the privilege of working with a lot of different young men and young women, and two of my students, both of them are now doctors. One is he's over gastro and Piedmont hospitals in Atlanta. He comes from a second generation. His mom was a teacher and his father was the first black surgeon in Palm Beach County. The other young man, John Mark Wesley, was the band director. He was the band leader at Atlantic. He later became a successful thoracic surgeon. His father, the late Carl Wesley, was the band director at Carver High School, and his mom, Miss Libby Wesley, was a teacher. She was on my row in 3rd grade at Spady. And these two young men were students when I was at Atlantic High School, and the interactions, just always speaking with them and watching them, and not really having the other than to tell them, y'all know the expectations are big, and they never wavered. And in fact, the other day I actually called young Dr. Norris to speak to a student who just graduated from college in biology, and she's wanting to take the MCAT. Her mom was looking for a role model, and he said, well, call me and give her me, and I let the both of them talk. He's now communicating with her. And then probably one of the other young men was, I coached him for 4 to 5 years in high school. He went on, played in the NFL, won 3 national championships at the University of Miami, got a PhD, and came back to teach school when his NFL career ended, and he became a school superintendent for 5.5 years. Those highs. Probably if I had to find a low, it would be the night, Danny, when, you remember when the guy shot and killed everybody in Riviera Beach, the mom and the kids, and shot the one young man, and he didn't die. He thought he had killed him, or he thought he had shot him in his neck, and they ended off pitching off his carotid artery to the medical folk out there, and a group of our officers engaged him, and then he took his own life at the front door. And the symbolic thing about that for me was, and he left 2 young infants in the room that he never touched, because they were the 2 children him and the young lady had in common. But those children were all students at that time at the school district, and we had to make phone calls to the district to have grief counselors and that kind of thing. And probably the most troubling piece for me was when I walked into that house and you find out just how emotional, how fragile you are as an officer. To see that mom up against the wall with her hands up and knowing that she was trying to protect her children and lost her life like that. That impacted me in a way as a human being, as a husband and a father and a grandfather. That bothered me for a long time. I still have those memories that somehow come up with certain times, and what it did for me is the kind of inhumanity that we do to each other and how we do it. And I'm just thinking, what would have provoked him to take the lives of those children like that? And these are the things that, in the 42, almost 43 years of me doing this, if there was a thing, if I could ever figure a way to reach within the skull, your cranium cap, what's driving you? What would make you want to do that? And these are the things that, I know a lot of people look at us and think, well, you know, they just go home. Yeah, we go home, we have lots of things in our head that we can't get rid of. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. Sitting here, I have cried of many a nights in my car or sitting in my driveway before I go in the house, because I don't want to take that in with my wife and my children. And my daughter would call and she tells me now, you know, when you gonna get some real counseling? And I say, well, I'm gonna get some. But these kinds of losses, these are the things that as law enforcement professionals, we have to sort out, come back, look you in the face, and continue to do our job on a daily basis. And it is one of the things that culturally, you suck it up and go. But for me, it's a fundamental difference that the institutions, the communities that we work for need to do more on the mental health end of helping every segment of our world heal and be better, because officers live with this every day.
I remember that case.
Man.
September of 2010.
2010.
6 people lost their lives that day.
Man, I was messed up for
Sunday night, Monday morning.
Oh, listen, that was you know what? And these are middle school. Some of the children, had they not had their IDs by their beds, they would have been unrecognizable. And then he took his own life, and when the officers approached him. And so, you know, but for the fact that, you know, these are the highs and lows of what we do. And you can't, and how do you answer that? You can't. You know, and then you have to go to a family, and families show up, and you know, you got to make these explanations. Well, let me explain to you. They looking at you like, what? And everybody's in shock. And it's what I call that great mental health dilemma. You got to put that down and go back to work the very next day and face officers and communities and still do your job and be that consummate professional. And that's the kind of commitment that if you're going to do this work, you have to have. And I don't see that. I don't see that kind of
Now, you touched on a very, very, very important topic. And that's definitely going to be a topic in the future for the Lawmen's Lens to look at and discuss, is the mental health of the officers, and how officers cope with some of the situations and things that they've seen over the years. So this is going to conclude this segment of the Lawmen's Lens. We'll be right back with you. And now, we are in this segment called the Donut Docket. You know, police officers love donuts. So therefore, we're going to highlight our local activities in the community, current events that are occurring around the world and in our communities on a list every month, and we'll discuss some of those items. As you can see, I've already taken a bite out of this donut. This month's donut is a glazed donut. You know, glazed donuts were originally established and has roots from the Dutch from the early 1900s. It became popular later on around 1933 when they became mass produced. And that is this month's Donut of the month, the glazed donut. Thank you. Welcome back to the Lawmen's Lens. We've invited a special guest with us this afternoon, Pastor Ken Jackson. Ken, you know, we kind of grew up in the Glades area, all of our lives together, marched in the band together, Glades Central, and you started a not-for-profit organization. And at the time, I was working in Pahokee as the assistant chief and lieutenant. And ultimately, I became the chief of police in South Bay. And you started a crime prevention program. And I know you probably don't think, well, this is not a crime prevention program. I started an after-school program. But the things that you were doing and the effect you were having on the community, it was a community program that kept latchkey kids busy and in a structured environment. And we in law enforcement saw that as kind of like a crime prevention program. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, based on my experiences when we grew up together and the impact that band had on us, we were traveling all over the place every year. But everybody that was in the band program, we had to have certain grades, we had to have certain conduct. And I thought it would be a great idea because I came back as a band director initially at Lakeshore Middle School. But the kids, when they came to me in 6th grade, we had to take the next 3 years to rehabilitate most of them to make them better students. And so we found that even the kids who were not performing well in the classroom, they were still doing very well in band. And so I decided to take that concept, instead of just hoping to rehabilitate kids coming to middle school, go back to kindergarten and try and instill some of those same practice habits, a transfer of learning that takes place in music and band, and work with kids in elementary school from kindergarten on up. We had success. My goal there was to create a subculture in the community that became attractive to kids, and they would want to become a part of this subculture until that culture became dominant. And what I mean by that is when we developed excellency in the program, then people wanted to be a part of it. Their kids wanted to be a part of it because they saw themselves traveling internationally and doing other things. I mean, coming very good at different disciplines of the arts. Those things were not available to kids in the Glades, so we thought we would make it available by bringing artists in and working with the young kids. I knew we were having some level of success when your kids started to become a part of the program.
Yeah.
Sergeant Battle, Chief Dowdell, and yourself, all of your kids came through, not all of them, but your kids came through the program as well. And we started to see.
All of mine did.
Yeah, all of yours. Yeah. So that's one of the things that was in my life.
I think we kind of skipped a couple things there. The name of your program was?
Street Beat.
And your philosophy was reclaim
the city through the arts.
Through the arts, and you mean the fine arts?
Yes.
I know somewhere there's a correlation between the fine arts and intellect. Did that play a role, you think, with increasing grades and helping kids, helping students at the time?
Without a doubt.
Stimulus.
There's some research by David Sousa that says that a kid, if he can keep a steady tempo on a drum, the kid should be able to read at the same degree. And so by getting kids involved in rhythm, getting kids involved in cross-pollinating. So to give you one example, we took a 4th grade class. They were studying the solar system, the planets. And the 4th grade teacher could not get that lesson across. But what we decided to do was bring a dance artist into that 4th grade class, the science class, and she choreographed the planets. And the kid in the middle was wearing a yellow rain suit representing the sun. And he was there with his arms across, and all of the planets were dancing around him, the moons from some of those planets. And because of that, because the kids danced the lesson, instead of just sitting down and hoping to memorize the lesson, all of the kids in that class passed with an A. We decided to do something else and let our kindergartners take that same test by teaching them with music, and our kindergartners passed the 4th grade test. And so it says that we have to approach these kids the way they learn instead of telling them to learn the way we teach. It takes a little adjustment, but it makes a big difference, especially culturally.
Visual.
Visual.
They were visual learners.
Exactly.
And so what you were able to do is to take the visual acuity
Yeah.
and tie it to a process. And see, you would be amazed that, because look at how young kids take these devices. Like my 3-year-old granddaughter, she will take this phone and come back and tell me everything she has seen, and then will try to describe a picture. This is a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Now, think about what you were doing then from an educational standpoint. Educators didn't do that.
No.
You came up with this as a process based on these children's what? Experiences. And as my wife would like to say, we are going to teach you where you are.
Right.
And that's what they like.
Yeah.
And now, remarkably, your program, Street Beat, every community had some form of an after-school program like that. My oldest daughter was in one of those programs when she was after school at Banyan Creek, and but she did the after school, and so were my nieces and nephews. And so all of them, it did something for their learning. However, when I remember them talking about Street Beat when I was with the district, because of the things that it was doing and where you were, because it was changing the dynamics. And it also, you saw a drop in the juvenile crime in that area, because guess what they were doing? They were now engaged in an activity that stimulated the intellect that they had but was never tapped.
Were you able to track your kids? I know your Street Beat was up and organized and functioned for over 25 years. Were you ever able to track, or did you track the kids? I know no one's going to have 100%
Right.
success rate, but were you able to track some of your kids and know what they're doing in life?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're still in touch with quite a few of them, including your kids. And we have quite a few of those young people who've come back as commissioners and mayors in the community. We have several doctors, we have attorneys, and we have, I know of 2 university presidents that came through Street Beat.
Wow.
And so out of that small area, there's been quite a bit of success.
That's a big deal.
And I'm hearing now more and more how many of those young people have gone on to college and completed college and doing well.
Well, look at us here. These 2 young people, his two, that look at where they are in their careers and what they're doing. Now, whether Street Beat did that or they already had that ability, if it was there, you tapped it. You as I would say, you awaken a visual piece of their creativity that put them where they are, and that's important. Because once a child or any person finds a passion for a discipline, guess what happens? They take off.
Exactly.
And if you can keep feeding that passion grows.
Yeah.
So, and that's really, I think, and when you look at our communities, when we had and I'm going to date myself, we had Old Lakeshore High School, you know, the passion of the educators, the love that they shared and they poured into their students, it was remarkable, because look at the students that came out of that segregated era, whether it be Lincoln High School, or whether it be JFK, or whether it be Carver, whether it be Roosevelt. But look at what they did and how they awakened that intellect within them students. It was because of your caring, compassion, and learning, and you tapped a resource that opened their minds to receive the knowledge, and so they came as new sponges, prepared to soak it all up and be what they are.
I know Street Beat is not currently 100% operational. There are some things working in the background. So what's going on with Street Beat, and what do you see as the future of Street Beat?
Well, Street Beat is going to be a vital part of the school that we're establishing. Street Beat is going to do all of the after-school programming.
Wow.
And it's going to also bring in artists that we won't have with the school that we can make available to the young people in the Glades.
What school?
I think it's called Covenant Arts
So
Academy.
you're putting together a charter school or a private school?
Well, we've been approved for a charter by Palm Beach County, but we've decided to go the private route because there are a lot of limitations with what we can teach and what we can't teach.
Under the charter rule.
Under the charter, under the public school situation. So we want to continue
to do what you're talking about. We want to continue to develop character, not just make people smart, because it takes smart people to make bums. But when you got somebody smart and their character is in check, then we can make a bigger impact in our community. I think so many times what we do is when we see somebody else do something, another race or whatever, we think it must be better. But there was so many things that we did great when you guys and I were coming up, that our kids don't get a chance to touch. And so we want to have the school operational. It's going to be a performing arts school, and we're in process now of getting that started. We're looking at about a year down the road before we can launch the school, but we're very excited about this.
Wow.
What will be the grade levels?
It's going to be K through 8 initially, until we get our kids up to the 6th grade, and then we'll start the high school process, because the environment is so important for the school locations. We don't want to get our kids ready for the same environment and then release them to something else for high school. We want to keep them in that same environment.
You want to keep them in that same incubator.
Exactly.
Because there is a distinct difference, because I look at our K through 8 centers with our students.
Yeah.
They do remarkably better than those kids that go to a middle school.
Right.
Because they go from, like, there are several schools, 4 or 5 schools in the district that are K through 8.
Yeah.
Those kids outperform everybody else in that setting. So that's great.
Yeah.
And
I'm excited about it.
We're excited for the community. We need something in the Glades. And you're primarily going to be located in Belglade, South Bay, Pahokee area?
Well, we've been looking, and it's difficult to find space that can accommodate a full school.
Yeah.
And so we've been forced to start our K through 8 school, K through 2, K through 3, and then add a year every year until we get to the full K through 8. But yes, we're hoping to do Belglade because it's easier to bring kids in from the outer communities, Pahokee and South Bay, than to have the school at either South Bay or Pahokee. So the goal is to have it in Belglade.
Good. That sounds good. That sounds interesting. Well, we're very happy that you were able to stop by, Pastor Ken, and give us an update on Street Beat and talk a little bit about how Street Beat affected the community.
My pleasure.
I personally benefited from having Street Beat in the community as a parent and as the chief of police, by knowing that those kids were going to be a positive part of the community because they were mentored and trained and challenged at such an early age at Street Beat.
Thank you.
That will bring us to the conclusion of this segment of the Lawmen's Lens, and I'm your host, Danny Jones. We'll see you next time.
Let 'em breathe, wind.